Well, good morning, everybody. Really a fantastic welcome to you all. I just said to my colleagues on the panel I'd wait till 150 people had gone on the call. So I've decided to start. I'm sure there'll be some late stragglers who might just miss the very beginning of this, but never mind. We are expecting about 175 people on this call. So it's a really exciting morning, and thank you so much for sparing the time to join, not only to join this morning, but actually even to think that this would be the most amazing programme for you. So yes, my name's Greta Westwood. I'm the Chief Exec of the Florence Nightingale Foundation, and a really good morning to you. This programme was identified, I would say, Sue, I know Sue's on the programme and she's probably going to laugh when I say this. I think we started talking about a leadership programme for infection prevention control nurses probably 18 months ago, and that was clearly before COVID. And now look at us, we've had a year of COVID where it's been the importance of being infection prevention control nurses. You have absolutely been at the forefront of leadership during this pandemic. So I want to say a really well done for that, and thank you for your commitment and your passion for always doing the right thing. And I guess because of this, it became more important that the NHS England, through Sue's leadership, that we invested in some leadership for infection prevention control nurses. And this programme was born out of that idea. And Sue Tranker, I'll introduce you in a minute, was so intent that we could access as many IPC nurses as possible, that we came up with the idea of doing this as a remote programme, as a webinar. And so for this particular webinar, today's webinar, is leading in challenging times. And my goodness, what a challenging time it's been for you. Who'd have known that this is where we'd be at the beginning of 2020, the year of the bicentenary of Florence Nightingale, and look at us now, a year on, almost a year since the first lockdown happened. But really, thank you so much for your leadership during this time. It has been challenging, and we want to say a special thank you, which is why NHS England have invested in this programme. So this programme is entitled a Leadership Boost Programme, and you will have seen the programme, so I'm not going to go into this. But the purpose of this morning is really to welcome you from the Florence Nightingale Foundation. There are a number of people on the panel who will introduce themselves in a moment, but I want to say a special thank you to Sue Tranker. So Sue is one of the Deputy Chief Nurses for England. And when I looked at her profile on LinkedIn, I could have gone to her biography on NHS England's website. I didn't. I wonder what Sue says about herself. So I've gone back as far as probably the last 10 years, and I really see the whole of Sue's professional career in the last 10 years has been about patient safety, deteriorating patient, critical care outreach. And then in 2017, she became a deputy chief nurse in Buckinghamshire Healthcare, and then a chief nurse at Ashford and St Peter's. And it was there, forgive me too if this is wrong, but I think originally you were seconded into Ruth's team as one of the deputy chief nurses for nursing officers for England, with a particular interest in the patient safety agenda. So patient safety, innovation, and clinical quality improvement, with IPC as part of that portfolio in clinical governance. So I wondered what Sue was talking about herself. So she said so a chief nurse with a demonstrable history of improving patient safety in the hospital and the healthcare industry, skilled in regulation, nursing education, patient safety, efficiency, productivity, workforce, clinical care outreach, and quality improvement in healthcare. Strong healthcare services professional. My goodness, that was all in one sentence with many commas. What a portfolio, what a CV you've had, Sue. And it's my really great pleasure to introduce you to Sue with that with that short bio about her. But Sue wants to say a few words of welcome to you all. So I'm going to pass you over to Sue now. Sue, on behalf of the Florence Nightingale Foundation, thank you so much for your commitment to this, and thank you so much for allowing us the privilege and the honour to present this Leadership Boost programme for infection prevention control nurses across England. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Greta, and wow, what an introduction. Thank you ever so much. So good morning, everyone. I'm Sue, Sue Tranker, as Greta has said, and I work at NHS England and Improvement. And I've been really privileged this last year to lead an absolutely outstanding national infection prevention and control team who have worked tirelessly for this year to bring you updated guidance, operational implementation toolkits, and a ton of support to the system. So I'm hugely honoured to be here with you this morning, welcoming you to what I hope will be the first of many leadership events for those practicing, supporting and championing infection prevention and control. I am delighted to see that we have nearly 167 of you on the call, and I know, as Greta has said, we had a number more that have booked on, so I'm hoping we'll make our numbers up through the day. And I'm really hopeful that you will, as this program progresses, commit to your own learning, invest this time in you and your future. We have witnessed the tireless work you and your teams do to protect patients, visitors, and each other from the risks of infection, not only in the last year, but I think the last year has brought into stark focus the clarity of infection prevention and control, and how important and critical it is to invest not only in the service, but in you personally, and also to consider how we grow the IPC workforce for the future. The pandemic has thrust IPC into the spotlight like never before. And we thank you, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for the huge efforts locally, regionally, and nationally that have been made to maintain the highest level of excellence. It is because of you and what you do on a daily basis that we are in this place that we are today, which is we're seeing lifting of some of the national restrictions. You are strong, compassionate leaders doing an amazing job in such challenging and unprecedented circumstances. So this program, from me to you, is a gift. It's a gift to you for your professional and your personal growth. And I see this as a support. And I can see 170 of you now coming together to form such a lovely network. And we hope that as you journey with the Florence Nightingale Foundation, supported by the National IPC team, you will find this program fulfilling. You'll share your strengths and wisdom, and you'll take away some vital learning for the future. Once again, I want to say a huge, huge thank you to every colleague working hard to practice, support, and champion excellence in IPC. Your commitment, your energy, and expertise is of critical importance all year round, but no more so now. Finally, I want to say, yesterday was International Women's Day. So to all my fellow ladies and women out there, and any honorary women even, I celebrate your strength, your independence, and your power. Remember that and hold on to that. And thank you once again for all you've done. I would like to take this moment now to introduce you to the National Head of IPC, Dr. Lisa Ritchie, who has worked incredibly hard, tirelessly, and is committed to doing the right thing for you and those and patients at the front line. So without any further ado, I will pass you on to Dr. Lisa Ritchie.
Good morning, everyone, and I just echo the thanks of Sue to all of you again. This past year has been a tough one for everyone, and it certainly made me doubt at times my IPC knowledge, expertise, and leadership capability. But this leadership event is a great opportunity to step back from your job and providing an opportunity to share experiences, reflect on the practices over this past year, the working relationships, and consider the leadership challenges that you've faced in the last 14 months or so. To think about how this has impacted you, what experiences you have faced, and how this may influence you in your professional practice as we move towards COVID-19 recovery. And that movement towards COVID-19 recovery and the business as usual for IPC teams is at all levels, nationally, regionally, and locally. And for that, we will continue to need good and effective leadership, as we have seen thus far. And the key challenge for all of us being the restoration and the development of infection prevention control programs whilst the threat of the pandemic remains. So if I can share my strategic vision for the national programme going forward, and one that I would like investment in across all care systems, is that we as IPC practitioners across all of England will be recognised nationally and internationally for a workforce that is knowledgeable and prepared to deal with current and emerging infection threats, that we will increase IPC capability through this leadership, but education and training will be developed in tandem with frontline staff to address the requirements in a way that's clearly relevant to the specific challenges they face, and that guidelines and education and training resources will be concise and will only be updated when necessary and provided through a single trusted source to maximise value and prevent conflicting information being disseminated. We will provide timely, practical, evidence-based infection prevention and control guidelines, that science and evidence base will be at the core of our IPC decision making, and that IPC will be integral to patient safety and quality in all health and care settings. So the vital role of infection prevention and control across health and care systems has been brought back into stark focus during this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think we've all said that and all seen it, and everyone has been doing a fantastic job. But the pandemic has provided a renewed focus on IPC and a real acknowledgement of the need for strong leadership and influence in our IPC workforce. So I hope you enjoy these sessions and use the time to gain as much as you can from this opportunity with the Florence Nightingale Foundation. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand you over to Gemma.
Thank you, Lisa. My name's Gemma Stacy. I'm the Director of Academy at the Florence Nightingale Foundation and also a mental health nurse. I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you to Sue, Greta and Lisa, who won't stay on the rest of the webinar with us. So thank you for setting the scene for us and for giving us permission to take some time off that treadmill and engage with each other as a network of IPC nurses to reflect and think about some of the challenges we've experienced recently and how we build on that learning from those challenges moving forward. So a farewell to Sue and Greta and Lisa for now. So I'll introduce you to the programme for today. We are starting off with a session from Hartridge Leadership Consultancy, who are going to talk us through some of the theoretical, also practical and observational intelligence that they've gleaned from supporting teams at all levels of the NHS organisation throughout the pandemic. And this is all framed in how we can lead during challenging times such as the ones that we've recently encountered. We'll then take a short break and I'll take over from Nicola and Amy from Hartridge to talk to you about how we can create psychological safety within our environments as we move into what's increasingly been known as a recovery or restorative phase of our response towards the pandemic. We'll close the webinar at 12:30 and you will have been sent an email whilst you're on the webinar with some self-directed learning for you to complete either directly after or in preparation for the next part of the programme, which is your action learning set, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Now, because we're so great in numbers today, we unfortunately can't see you all and we can't talk to you all, which is very tricky for myself, Nicola and Amy. It's not our preferred way of engaging with audiences. But because we wanted to reach a larger number for this part of the programme, then we've gone with the webinar platform. And what we would like to do is for you to use the different functions in the Zoom webinar to engage with us. So you can use the chat function, as some of you already had. I think Deborah kicked us off this morning with a good morning and welcome. And that's really for you to share your thoughts and any comments on what you are hearing today. And then we've also got a Q&A function. And this is where you can ask questions to myself, Nicola and Amy, and we'll take breaks throughout the session, the morning, to address those questions and answer as many as possible. Any that we don't have time to answer during the webinar, we will stay online afterwards and complete in a text base, and that will be forwarded out to you along with the recording of the webinar as well. So without further ado, let's make a start. I'll introduce you to Amy Hart and Nicola Hartley, who make up Hartridge Leadership Consultancy. I'm going to hand over control to Amy now. There we go. Over to you, Amy.
Gemma, thank you. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming today. This is, we've been really looking forward to this day. We feel very privileged to be able to work with you today, and we hope that you enjoy the session and engage with it. As Gemma said, this is Nicola and I. This isn't our preference. We'd much rather be in a room with you. We'd much rather be working with your individual context, but needs must, and we're delighted to be here today. So just a little bit about us. We are our formal definition is a micro company. It doesn't feel like that all the time. We work with a number of associates and professional experts. We've both got, so Nicola and I have both got years of experience working in the NHS and with the NHS. So more latterly is we've been working with the NHS in a consultancy capacity. You'll notice that we've got Dr. Jo Ramsden also on the slide. Jo works with us as an associate, as a subject matter expert. She's a consultant clinical psychologist, and she's been providing her own input into some of the challenging year, particularly from a psychological safety perspective. So a bit like the work that Gemma will do with you later. Our mission is to help build sustainable change in organisations. So Nicola and I, we are the Nanny McPhee, as we call it, of organisations. So when you need us, we stay. When you want us, we go. I.e., we like to feel that we offer sustainable solutions to organisations and systems in a way that doesn't leave people reliant on us. We offer a number of programmes. So we offer coaching, development. We do cultural change programmes in organisations and advice on organisations who are managing that themselves. And I think it's fair to say that we love our jobs. We love working with you. We work with many boards and teams and individuals, and we are delighted that we're Florence Nightingale Associates. Florence Nightingale is an organisation that is very beloved to us, that does some fantastic work, and therefore we spend a lot of our time working on Florence Nightingale programmes. We also have a business manager who refuses to have her photo up, but she keeps the wheels on the cart very much firmly going. The last thing to say is we've got values. So we are a values-driven organisation, and we believe that values are the root and the stalk to organisations. And our values are about imagination, particularly at the moment, compassion, which we'll talk about today, and flexibility, which again seems very applicable at the moment. So that is us. For the first bit of our content, I'm going to hand over to my business partner, Nicola Hartley, to talk us through a bit of a personal story.
Thank you, Amy, and good morning, everyone. We are absolutely delighted to be with you here today to share our thoughts on this really important topic. We've heard it already, but it's worth saying again, these certainly are anxious times for each of us as individuals, in our roles outside work, and as leaders in our roles within work. Amy and I have spent quite a lot of time in recent months reading and reviewing some of the latest research in order to understand how best we can support the managers and leaders that we work with, given the significant personal and professional impact COVID-19 pandemic has had on everyone working in the NHS. So I'm going to start with a personal story, talking about what anxious times have looked like and felt like for me at work over my whole career. We're then going to see how this links to some of the recent research and explore when I felt anxious at work, why I felt anxious at work, and what has helped me. We're going to start by thinking about what do anxious times mean? What's the definition of anxious times? And then we're going to explore about how anxiety might be a powerful partner for us. We like this. We like simple definitions, and we like this one. We think it sums it up. An anxious time or situation is one during which you feel nervous or worried. Really important to hold the thought right now. You'll all have been drawn to this event. The heading is Leading in Challenging Times. We're talking about anxiety and anxious times and using that to lead well. We know that different triggers for each of us for anxiety, what causes anxiety for one will not for somebody else. Different aspects of our roles will affect us in different ways. I'm going to describe the roles that came to mind when I thought about this definition, times in my career or situations in my career when I have felt worried or anxious, and then link it to some of the contemporary concepts. So this is an attempt to plot some of those anxious moments. I've had a very long career. It's nearly 40 years. Safe to say it's been bumpy along the way. Sometimes I've felt nervous, in fact, quite a few, and anxiety has played a big part. What I also noticed when I was preparing for today was that although each of these examples is when I was uncertain or anxious, I also most of the time loved those roles. So it doesn't equate that when I wasn't anxious, I wasn't enjoying it, because I loved all of these roles. So right to the beginning, the left-hand side, this is me scribing on a flip chart, and then you'll see a microphone. So early on, presentations and public speaking caused me enormous anxiety at work. I was quite shy, I was very self-conscious, which is quite ironic given what I do today and what I am doing today. I took an early decision as a very young leader that I needed to overcome this feeling, and through a combination of training and practice, I managed to move those feelings from feelings of anxiety to feelings of even excitement. And I can honestly say now, I get a little flurry of excitement at the thought of presenting and working with groups of people. How has this affected my practice as a leader? I work really hard to show empathy for anyone presenting. So I never underestimate the task for others. I never assume people are finding it easy. I always try and make eye contact and nod encouragingly, whether it's a small group, a large forum, a massive conference. It's something I do. So if we hold that thought and imagine today, I can't see anyone's faces. I'm relying totally on looking at myself and my slide. That in itself raises anxiety, and that didn't, the novelty of that didn't pass me by this morning as we were preparing. So what am I doing? I'm imagining I can see each of you. I'm still thinking I can connect with you, and I'm thinking carefully about the messages that we want to share. So you'll see the next icon is supposed to be a doctor in a white coat with a stethoscope, and that was very much my experience in my early career. And one of the things that would keep me awake at night, literally, would be the idea of having to have a difficult conversation with a member of medical staff. At that time, I had a great mentor, and she taught me some wonderful things along the way. She gave me two important pieces of advice. One of the most important leadership acts, she told me, is to always do the right thing. And if you're always doing the right thing, the way you do it matters, and treat everybody as you would like to be treated. And I've held on to that advice throughout my career. And what I did at that time was I reframed the task of a difficult conversation with a member of the medical staff into a right thing activity that I needed to do as a leader. And when I was having those difficult conversations, I always imagined I was talking to me. That certainly helped me along the way. Now, you might be wondering about the hard hats. I've had a strange career, a varied career. In this role, I was leading an all-male team of building surveyors and engineers, and we were responsible for designing and building a new theatre and diagnostic imaging block. In case you're wondering why I might have found that anxiety-provoking, I need to tell you I have no clinical background. I didn't really know what a diagnostic imaging block was, and I had absolutely no idea about construction. So what helped me? I never pretended to know what I didn't know. I asked loads of questions, and I really valued the experts in my team. We had an absolutely fantastic time, and we weathered the bumps together. Moving on, the arrows are to indicate the mid-90s, when the science of QI, quality improvement, was just appearing in healthcare. And I was asked to introduce some of these new and emerging methodologies, including process mapping, into an organisation where there was a high level of resistance and cynicism from everyone. So what did I do? I embraced the ideas. I admitted to everyone this was an experiment, that we were learning together, and quite bravely said that if it didn't work, we could stop doing it. I had no idea if that was true, but it helped me position this as something that we were trying together. Moving on, the photo of the buildings is to represent a period of time in the NHS when there were a lot of mergers going on. And my job was to manage those mergers. At the time, these were government driven. So we'd been through a period of many reorganisations, reducing things called primary care trusts and health authorities. And my job was to project manage that in my locality. As you can imagine, this was not at all popular. A high level of job loss, uncertainty for individuals, and it came on the back of, as I say, many previous restructures. I had to really work hard to decide what my role as a leader was during that time. My role was to manage the change, to make it fair and as transparent as possible, to interpret and make sense of national decision making so that locally people could understand how that would work and what would happen and when it would happen to them, and always act in the best interest of our staff. It was a tough job, and it was at that point I decided I was going to try something else. So the big red cross is me leaving the NHS. That was a massive risk for me. It was very anxiety provoking. I'd only ever known the NHS and was taking a new career path. And I went to join the Home Office. That's supposed to be a police officer. The chairs are to denote, and the school desk are to note, this was a change of career and I had to learn new skills. I had to go back to school in many ways. I learned to be a coach. I learned about psychometric testing. I learned about leading teams and groups and developing others. And this was a high anxiety moment for me. I'd lost all my networks, all my connections. I had to learn new skills. I was coaching senior police officers in a world I didn't know. What I realised was that the leadership challenges were very similar across the public sector, and that my skills were transferable. And what I did in that moment was I renamed what I was feeling, and I noticed that rather than thinking I haven't the skills for this, I started to realise that I actually had, and they were very transferable. I was lured back towards healthcare though. The King's Fund beckoned, probably the pinnacle of my career, and also the most anxiety invoking. It had all the ingredients, tons of public speaking, leading teams. I had to generate profit. I had to meet income targets. I was hosting large conferences, often with very senior political leaders as keynote speakers. It was amazing and exhausting. I did it for 5 years. And when I knew the time was right, what I did and what helped me was knowing I needed to move on. The sorts of jobs that put you under that level of pressure and require that level of energy, I believe, are time limited. And at that point, decided to be compassionate to myself, which is an important thing to think about. And so I went back to the health service. I went home. I went back into a trust and had the best time. For the first time in my career, I think I can say I'm about 35 years in now, actually knew what I was doing most of the time. I was leading a culture change program. It was a joyous experience, but things still made me anxious. And at that point, it was being perceived as the expert, the weight of responsibility for knowing how to do things. And what I learned to do and what helped me was pressing a pause button. When you don't know the answer, you probably know someone else who will. The biggest thing that helped me in this was having an amazing home team, which were my support and my inspiration. You'll see Hartridge bobs up at the end. That's really symbolising moving into self-employment. Thankfully, I met Amy. We've built the business together and we've been slightly nervous. We're hardly ever worried. However, the sort of work we do is this sort of work. And it's, I think, only fair to be honest to say doing this sort of work can be anxiety provoking. The last year for us, we've had to change our way of working. As Amy said, we're people. We'd much rather be in a room with you all. We've had to learn and adapt and dig deep in terms of what we can do in the circumstances that present us. So, before we take a look at the theory that relates to my story, there is one big lesson I learned about 20 years in. And it was this, it was liberating. It significantly changed how I felt about work and some of the challenges. Somebody said to me, we're in the middle of many reorganisations, lots of people complaining about the number of reorganisations, and somebody whispered in my ear, if you work in the NHS, change is inevitable. You'd better get used to it. It became my new normal. It changed my mindset. And as I say, it was absolutely liberating. Okay, let's have a look at the theory that links to all of this. We have enjoyed reading an article from the Harvard Business Review. We'll give you all the references at the end of our session. This is You're on a Leadership Development Programme. We're going to give you material. If it interests you, we encourage you to go and have a look at more of it. The key lessons from this article. The first one, know yourself. What challenges me and how do I respond? So just looking back over my career has made me do a bit of this. I know what challenges me, and I also know how I respond. When I'm anxious, I don't eat, I don't sleep, I feel sick. Recognizing those, I have headaches, I get migraines. They're all the signals that I need to watch for. What I've learned to do over time are some of these other things. And the next one has been huge for me. Relabeling. When something feels like an anxiety, I need to give it another name. So for me, anxiety is a temporary uncertainty. You'll all have your own labels, but thinking of things in a way that makes them feel more manageable. And I gave some examples in my story. The big message in this review, it's very current, it's very recent, it's been written in the light of the pandemic. Your emotions are normal. It's okay to feel anxious. A book we refer to many times when we're working with individuals on programs is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, Susan Jeffers. We can't recommend that enough. Anxiety can be a powerful enemy, so we need to make it our partner. And we need to move it from subconscious to conscious. We need to recognize it, we need to know ourselves, we need to relabel it, and then we need to make it something that helps us be the best we can be. Being genuine has been a really important part of my career. Say what you know to be true in this moment. Quite often we put ourselves under pressure to have all the answers. And under that pressure, we decide we're going to say nothing until we have all the answers. I learned this lesson in a hard way when I was working with the restructures and reorganisations. Staff wanted to know what was happening, and it was better to hear from me that we didn't know any more than that at the moment than to hear nothing from me, which made them feel suspicious. So say what you know to be true in this moment. Just doing the best you can. We love this phrase. We've worked with a lot of teams during the last year, and this has come up a lot. Perfect is the enemy of good. Know when good enough will do and doing the best you can. I talked about the importance of my safe team. So know your safe team. know where your support infrastructure is and have that when you need it and know that you can access it. And finally, and I think this is borne out throughout my story, be compassionate with yourself and with others. We talk a lot about compassion in healthcare. Start with yourself in order to be the best and do the best you can. Thank you. So how has this served me well? Looking back, I didn't realise at the time, it has enabled me to process threats differently, use parts of the brain responsible for getting into action. It's helped me react quickly when I needed to, and you'll know a lot about that from the last year. I've grown much more comfortable with uncomfortable feelings, not having the answers, not knowing. Really helped to be motivated to help my teams to be more resourceful, more productive and more creative, which in turn helps me to build down barriers and create new bonds. I think this is something we want to emphasise very much with you on this programme and today. Anxiety comes with the job of being a leader. It's the process of managing it that makes us stronger, more empathetic and more reflective. So that's from me. We're going to hear a bit more from Amy now about some of the other theories and research that we've been exploring and using with many of our clients. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. That was great to hear. So, usually at this point, after Nicola has told a personal story, if we were working with you, we would say, okay, have a think about what that evoked for you. What did that make you think about? What did that make you feel? What maybe did that make you remember? Certainly as Nicola was talking, things flew into my head that I'd totally forgotten about. Stages of my career and my life that had a profound impact on the choices that I made. So just notice those and think about what it makes you think about and what it makes you feel about before you lose them. So my section is going to be about, the first bit is about what is leadership. This is about leadership development. It's about a leadership boost. The definition of a boost that I've looked up is a source of help or encouragement leading to increase or improvement. So this is about improving you as leaders within the context and environment that you are working in. So what is leadership? There's so much out there about leadership. We could spend 2-day webinar probably describing leadership approaches, leadership theory, leadership temperaments, etc. But what is the job of a leader? We take this piece of work from the Centre for Creative Leadership, and they are an organisation, they're a fabulous organisation that work out in the States. They're very much aligned to healthcare, and they're aligned through our beloved Professor Michael West, who I'm sure a lot of you know, a lot of you are aware of, and if you're not, do look up his work. He works with healthcare. He works with healthcare predominantly, and he has been working in healthcare around compassionate and inclusive leadership for the last 20 plus years. His original piece of research was around patient mortality having a direct impact on team effectiveness. So teams influencing positive outcomes for patients. And he looked at leadership and he looked at team effectiveness. His work is stellar in the NHS. So the job of a leader, there's 3 bits to this. The first is about setting a direction. I always say you wouldn't get into a cab and say where you didn't want to go or that you wanted to go anywhere. You would be very clear about, this is where I want to head. So beginning with that end in mind, that doesn't need to be a big strategic direction. So for instance, Sue said at the start, she set out her strategic direction, which was about IPC being recognised nationally and internationally, increase IPC capacity together with frontline staff, strong leadership, etc. So she set out a very broad, big vision. This could be just where are we headed over the next 3 months. It doesn't have to be a kind of 3-year strategy, but it's a sense of where are we headed. The second piece is about creating alignment. And that's about whatever you are doing, is it towards that vision? And if you're not, what are you going to stop? What are you going to start? And maybe what are you going to continue? We very often work with organisations who are in habits of the processes, procedures, meetings, etc. they have in place, but they don't necessarily deliver what they want to around their set vision. And COVID has been such a time for us to reset that direction quickly and nimbly, and then align a whole set of activities around that, which I'm sure has been hugely challenging at times. And then the final bit, and this isn't in order of 1, 2, 3 necessarily. This is about hence the fact it's a Venn diagram, doing this together to create leadership, is about effective engagement. That's very much about keeping people with you, keeping people inspired, energized. So Nicola talked about that earlier in some of her stories about, if you don't know, that's okay. Get out there and talk to staff, be with staff. And that's been hugely challenging recently as well with the environment that we're working. So that's it. Nice and easy on one page, the job of a leader. We hope that's helpful to set a kind of framework around what the job is. So I'm going to slightly change tack now, and I'm going to think about, if that's the job, what's happening and what's the context? What makes that job maybe trickier than it could be? And that's where we got to this sense around stress and anxiety. So we know that stress is a response to a threat in a situation. So we know stress causes that sort of fight, flight, freeze response. But anxiety is something different. They often get termed together. I remember working with a gastro nurse that said to me, diarrhea and vomiting get talked about being the same thing, and yet they're very different. It's a bit the same with stress and anxiety. So anxiety is a reaction to the stress. Anxiety is a fear of what might happen in the future. Sometimes that fear is rational and sometimes not. And sometimes that fear is based on an experience of that stress before, or just a worry about it. So a new experience, or an old experience that maybe that has had a negative impact. What happens? So the impact of anxiety can impair our judgment. It can cause us to focus on the wrong things, distort the facts, or rush to conclusions. Now, just for a minute, I want us to think about that impact of anxiety. So, really live example, preparing for today. We always want to do the best job under the circumstances. I was anxious today. I was anxious about getting it right, about this being helpful to all of you. You're all out there, you're doing the tough job. We want this to boost you. We want this to be a source of help. Just having that slight anxiety that it might not be meant, in terms of my prep, I over prepped for today. So I'm using today just as an example of a small level of anxiety actually helping my performance today, but it could have impaired my performance. So if I hadn't slept last night or the night before because I was so worried about it, it might have impaired my performance. So it's just thinking about that level of anxiety, that level of arousal that's helpful, and that level of arousal that isn't helpful in terms of impacting our performance. And only you know that the level of arousal that is helpful for you. So you'll notice I put, but what about the zebra? What about the zebra? So imagine a zebra in the savannah, grazing as they do, and a lion comes along and attacks it. Doesn't see it and it attacks it. It attacks it. So it might have, so it will have thrown it in the moment. It attacks the zebra. Now it gets away. Imagine the zebra getting away. Lovely. Does the zebra then sit in a dark corner, sweating, ruminating about the fact that it's going to be, if it comes out of that dark hole, that the lion will still be there and it will attack it again? No. It goes back to the savannah and it starts grazing again, maybe seconds later. If you've watched the David Attenborough Perfect Planets, I'm sure you've seen loads of examples of this in nature, that they don't have anxiety. So they have a stress situation, a threat situation, but they don't suffer from anxiety like we do. But we do, we're not zebras. So anxiety is very normal and we have to acknowledge that we have to work with it. So acknowledging it and managing it is key. Okay. The next two slides are about working with teams throughout the pandemic, what we've noticed about them. This first slide is about how we've noticed, what we've noticed leaders be anxious about. The next slide is what we've noticed leaders be energized about. So what have we noticed leaders are anxious about? And some of these may land with you, some of them may not. These are themes pulled out of working with probably over 100 teams over the last 12 months. Definitely in the early days, there was a sense of getting it wrong. What do we do if we make the wrong decision at this point? Upsetting staff was a worry. So asking staff to do things that were challenging and tricky and emotional, they were worried about upsetting staff or asking staff not to do things. Lack of staff obviously has been an issue. Lack of democracy, so not being able to maybe get out there and talk to staff about things. Having to be quite command and control, just make a decision and go with it. Not making the right decision for the patient, so having to do things because of the circumstances that you wouldn't normally do. So you wouldn't provide the best care for patients. My experience in the NHS is as many things, but one as an HR director. And I know as an HR director, any case that I was ever involved in, I genuinely believe that everybody wanted to do the best for the patients, always. That was always their intent. Not always the impact, but always their intent. Not appearing resilient enough. So that sense of I need to be everything, I need to be this perfect leader. Not being physically present or connected enough because we've had to do a lot of things remotely. Not knowing what they'll face each day. So for some leaders, that's been hugely anxiety provoking. If any of you have done personality psychometrics before, we tend to have people who get energized by planning and some people who don't get energized by planning. Now, I am one of the people that gets energized by planning. So the thought of not knowing what I will face each day would definitely cause me some level of anxiety. It wouldn't energize me. And then the final one is the layer of anxiety from the world outside of work. So many of us have had to manage things in our home that we wouldn't have had to before. Children's schooling or dependent parents or all sorts of things that have gone, or friends that are struggling, lots of things that are going on outside of work that we might not have had before. So that all of those could cause a level of anxiety. So what have we also noticed that people feel energized by? And I should have said it for the last slide, all of this will drive a set of behaviors. So if you're anxious about things, that will drive a set of behaviors. If you're energized by things, that will drive a set of behaviors. So we've noticed leaders be energized by the pace of change. So being able to get on and make things happen that they hadn't done before. Associated to that, being nimble and agile. So we understand quite a lot of the governance and frameworks and work has been changed and shifted in order that we can make some day-to-day decisions and change things quickly. New ways of communicating. We certainly for us as a business, that's been a huge thing for us in terms of being able to realise that we don't have to spend our lives flying around the country. Being creative. So sometimes, isn't it nice to sit with people who don't know? None of us know. Let's do it together. Let's work it out together. There's a really good TED talk that talks about it's hard to learn when you already know. So a lot of us have had to do that. We've had to learn things and be creative. Being part of the NHS solution. So we've definitely noticed that people have felt very valued in the NHS, like they hadn't really heard in the NHS that they hadn't necessarily before, and how proud we all are of working in and with the NHS. It's a real sense of pride and importance. More meaningful conversation stroke interaction. So maybe conversations about stuff that really matters to people. And also not knowing what they will face each day. For some, they found that hugely, hugely energizing. So we hope that's helpful just in terms of thinking about some of the themes that we've noticed that have come out, and remembering that all this will drive a set of behaviours. So if I feel energised by something, I'm likely to go into it with a skip in my step and open to it and joyful about it. Generally things that we enjoy, we learn most from, and we often do our best. Things that we're anxious about and fearful about, that will drive a set of behaviours. So we might avoid it, or we might overcompensate, or we might behave in a way that is counterintuitive to what we know when we're at our best. I'm now going to talk a bit about the research. So Nicola alluded to it. We've been looking at lots of research over the last year to help us in order to help others. This actually comes from McKinsey, excuse me, and it talks about what leaders need during a crisis. So what they say right from the start is you don't need that predefined response plan. Now, the difficulty with that, as I read it, I thought, I think I'd be the sort of leader that would be thinking about my core skills, my core approach, what I know, my hard wiring around how I go into situations. What this is saying is you just need to think about how you're thinking about something and how you're behaving towards it. That mindset and behavior is really important to stop you overreacting and doing the wrong thing. 2 leadership behaviours that have been identified to help in a global crisis, and I think are really, really interesting, because I think you could apply these to many scenarios. The first is what they call deliberate calm. That's the ability to really detach from a situation. There's that moment of what we would call stimulus and response. So when you're stimulated by something, that moment to be able to detach from it, just for a second. To think clearly about how best you navigate it. A real deliberate calm is most found in well-grounded individuals who possess humility, but not helplessness. So that moment to think about something. And then the second is what they call bounded optimism, or confidence combined with realism. So that's about projecting confidence that the organisation will find a way through its tough situation. When I think about those 2 behaviours, they really help. They really help me think about, if I was to stick to those 2, even in my personal life, dealing with 2 teenage boys, that might be helpful. That deliberate calm when I'm triggered or struggling, and that sense of, this is going to be okay, we're going to find a way through it, let alone in the workplace. So we hope that's helpful to think about behaviours and mindsets. Now, in order for you to have that kind of behaviour and mindset, as often as you need it, it doesn't just come. So you can't wear yourself out and be calm, considered, thoughtful, hopeful. I don't believe the 2 go together, because when we're stressed and anxious and not looking after ourselves, they're much harder to access. So it's vital that leaders not only demonstrate empathy, but open themselves to empathy from others and remain attentive to their own well-being. So just for a minute, we hear a lot about well-being, but this is kind of saying, if you want to be an effective leader, look after yourself. Put your own gas mask on first. It's not a selfish act, it's a selfless act to look after yourself. As stress, fatigue and uncertainty builds up during a crisis, leaders might find that their abilities to process information, to remain level-headed, and to exercise good judgment diminish. We know good judgment is really important, so we do a lot of work around what we call level 5 leadership, which is executive leadership, and judgment is part of that. Humility, will, and clear judgment is really important. They will stand a better chance of countering functional declines, i.e. not being able to do this, if they encourage colleagues to express concern and do it for themselves. So investing time in your well-being will enable leaders to sustain their effectiveness. So this is about the long haul. So Gemma talked earlier, right in the start, around how this time coming up is being defined as that kind of restorative recovery time. In order to do that well, it's important to sustain your effectiveness even over that time. So with that in mind of thinking about your well-being, just a few final thoughts. We know that evidence of working with a compassion towards yourself and others has a positive impact on you and others' well-being and performance. So that critical or nurturing voice is at your disposal. We could easily use the critical voice for ourselves and others, particularly when we're stressed. Oh, you could have done that better. Oh, what were you thinking? That deficit response, as opposed to the more nurturing response, which is, well done. Well done. What have you learned? What would you do differently? It's very different to that critical voice, which sometimes in a lot of us is very natural. The qualities of compassion towards self and others are 6. Patience and wisdom, kindness and perseverance, and warmth and resolve. And if we were to do that to ourselves and to others, wouldn't that feel very different? This doesn't mean to say that you can't be decisive, that you can't be fast-paced, that you can't be creative. This isn't about how you do your work. It's about the qualities of your approach, the qualities to yourself and to others, your behavior and your mindset. So just some questions for you to think about, not for you to answer. Do you treat yourself as you would treat a friend or colleague? Often something we ask, Nicola and I both do a lot of executive coaching, and we'll often ask that. So what you're saying about yourself now, what would you say to a friend who is in your scenario? Do you practice mindfulness? Mindfulness is a state of accepting your thoughts, but not judging your thoughts. And to a degree, picking your responses. Do you ask for help and accept help? This is a big one for me. I've had to learn this over the last few years, and it's now my friend. It wasn't before. I was very happy to give out advice and I'm very happy to help people. I wasn't so good at doing it for myself. Do you give yourself permission to be imperfect? So I think Nicola talked about earlier about perfect is the enemy of good, perfect imperfections. This is about good enough, in the moment, what you have to do. Perfection, we think that reflection beats perfection. So being a reflective leader and thinking about how you're doing and learning by it and being joyful about it is much better than being critical with yourself about you should have done that better, because we could all do everything better, always. My final slide is a zebra. Just to remind us, we'll never be a zebra. As aspirant as it is to think about something happening and us just recovering, not thinking about it, not adapting to it, not being anxious about it, just going back to that difficult situation. We're not going to do that. So let's just accept that anxiety is here. Managed anxiety and acknowledged anxiety is really important. Deliberate calm and bounded optimism will help in terms of behaviours and mindsets. And how we do that is our ability to look after ourselves in order that we can look after others and be amazing, effective leaders, even if there's a pandemic going on. Thank you. I'm going to pause there. And I'm thinking Gemma is going to come in. I think we've got references actually, haven't we? Forgive me.
That's right, yeah.
So those there are reference. There's just a reference slide that's available for everybody.
Okay, so I'm going to stop our share screen now and ask Nicola also to pop her camera on. And this is your opportunity out there. There's 166 of you out there in the audience, and this is your opportunity to pose some questions to Amy, Nicola, based on your own experiences and what you've heard from them today. Whilst we're just generating some of those questions, just to remind everyone to pop those in the Q&A function as well, rather than the chat. It's just easier for us to keep track of. So I'll start off the Q&A, Amy, Nicola, just to get everybody warmed up. Everything that you've spoken about today made me really reflect on some of the challenges I've heard from IPC nurses over this period in providing our Nightingale frontline service, our support service to nurses and midwives. There was something that really stood out for me with the IPC nurses particularly, is that they've had to be part of a type of leadership that was defined by a command and control approach. So there were top-down directives coming from government, Public Health England, of how they were to instruct the practice of others. And the IPC nurses needed to enable staff to feel confident and reassured at a time where they didn't necessarily feel confident or reassured themselves in the guidance that they were receiving. I wondered what your thoughts were on the implications of that in the short term, and then how we learn from that moving forward.
Thank you, Gemma. Nicola, I don't know if you want to go first or second in terms of a response.
I was just thinking of trying to link it to my example of leading major reorganisations and being at that time, you feel very much the servant of government, and your job is to implement policy, which doesn't always come to it. And we come across this all the time in our work. And we've noticed the escalation of impact that that's had on leaders in the last few months of having to enact things that people don't believe in. And I think it was another one of those light bulb moments for me, realizing that we are servants of the government. If we choose to work in a public sector body, that's what we are. Our job as leader is not just to transmit, though. Our job of leader is to make sense, make palatable, and make it the best we can within our sphere of influence. So it's thinking about our sphere of influence, how can we make this best for the people, but accepting the tough job of leadership in healthcare is to take what we're told to do and make some sense of it. That was just the thing that struck me as you were talking, Gemma, and why I used that example, because it's a theme. It is a theme in the work that we do. Amy might want to say something about the command and control.
Yes, I think very similar though. I think it's the imposed change is really hard. And I think our second webinar, Gemma, is going to be about managing upwards, isn't it?
That's right.
Which might actually speak to some of this stuff. And trying to manage that imposed change in a way that is palatable for your staff. That comes out so much. We work with teams that don't want to be unpopular. They want to be liked. And yet, when we sort of discuss that a bit further with them, they don't really want to be popular. They want to be trusted and respected. And I believe that can be done even within a command and control regime. So if people are really clear about your intent, then I think that's really, really important. And the way that you work with people in a command and control setting is really important as well. So Nicola talked earlier about communicating as much as you can, being really authentic around what you do and you don't know. And actually those behaviours that we've just talked about. So that ability to be able to translate what is going on without all the emotion that you might be experiencing. And that, you know, I say that's not easy, but I think it's something that's really important. And then I suppose my final thought is, I know I work best, whether it's with a very commanding and controlling regime or a more laissez-faire regime if I really focus on what I can do something about and spend my energy there. If I spend my energy on things that I can't really control or influence, I just get more and more frustrated and more tired. So I am a pragmatist by in terms of my learning style, but it's definitely something that I've had to learn to master, which is no matter what's going on, let's not go to conspiracy. Let's go to what can we do about this. I don't know if that helps.
Wonderful, thank you. Absolutely. So a few questions now popping up from our audience. So there's questions from Suzanne, and she asks, how do you manage with challenging behaviours with those who will not adapt to change?
What a great question.
Really good question.
Are we going to do the same format, Nicola, where you go first and I go second?
I'll let you go first this time.
I would say, now this is the thing about webinars, you have to think on your feet. I would say we can all be challenging. We can all be resistant. I know when I've been resistant to something, it's often because I'm scared and I don't understand it and I want to understand more about it. So I think terming people challenging or resistant sometimes doesn't help us. Again, a lovely quote is, a cynical person is a passionate person who doesn't want to be disappointed again. I remember reading that years ago. And it's such a great, it reminds me very often. Now, there's a bit of a health warning with this. Don't spend your too much time on people that are very stuck. Don't water your rocks because they'll take all your water and your flower beds are waiting for that water. But it is worth thinking about that there's always a reason behind people's behaviour. So they may just need a bit of time, a bit of reassurance. We know role modelling top trumps anything. So your ability to role model good leadership should bring people with you. Some people will always be stuck, but that's the way I'd look at challenge or resistance. Is often there's a reason for it, and finding out that reason can unlock it. Nicola.
Thank you. Anything to add, Nicola?
Only to add, yes, always seek first to understand and don't assume we know why people are resisting. Secondly, though, sometimes it's a tough line to take. I've had to do this in organisations with groups of staff not behaving appropriately. We've had to reset the line in terms of what's acceptable around here, give people a chance to accept the new rules, and then they've got a choice.
Mm.
I do believe in particular the work I do around culture change, we have to set a standard of what we expect around here. And we don't confuse that with that person doesn't behave well, but they deliver. That person doesn't behave well, that needs to be addressed. And we have a way of doing things around here, and we have an aspiration for how we're going to do things around. It is a tough thing to call. Once you start, it unleashes and people believe that what you're trying to do is genuine.
Thank you. Thanks, both of you. So another question from Karen. It started off saying this is so helpful, thank you. Could you give advice on how to manage your own leadership, self-compassion, direction, and time in time that's necessary in a fast-paced and all-consuming way of working?
Gemma, would you mind reading that out again, just so I can understand the kernel of what you want?
So advice on how to manage your own leadership and self-compassion and direction, and in a time that is necessarily, as we're dealing with now, very fast-paced and all-consuming.
Okay, shall I? So we've sort of talked about this a bit, but I would say it's about making it a priority. So if in your head, that's one of the things you have to do and you pay attention to, it's not something I'll do if I have time. So it's very much a mindset, knowing that it's Amy's point, this isn't a selfish act. To be the best I can be, I need to invest in myself. I need to look after myself because I need to be in this for the long haul. We spend so much of our time coaching senior people around this element, and it is about people genuinely believing it's important and then prioritizing it. And it's only us that can do that. Sorry, Amy, you may have wanted to say the same.
Very much. So I would say, just think you're not alone. Everybody. So we, again, as Nicola says, we coach a lot of senior directors, chief executives. Very often it's about the same thing. This is hard, this is tough, am I doing the right thing? So they'll be questioning themselves, they'll be trying to be I always use a sporting analogy. When they're on the pitch, are they performing the way that they should? Spend as much time off the pitch to be thinking about that and getting yourself ready for your performance. So, you know, because that's selfless. That is thinking, I'm going to train well, I'm going to learn well, I'm going to think about things, I'm going to do the stuff that nourishes and renews me in order that I can be the best leader I can be. And remember the bit, you know, my husband says, and I sort of love this, everyone has their jerk time, Amy. And I sort of get that. People will know if there's the occasion where things slip. If you are generally consistent around the way that you are and the way that you look after yourself and others, then the odd blip is okay.
One more tip. In terms of finding time for yourself, maybe make a commitment to a trusted friend or colleague who then holds you to account. So I'm looking at Amy. I have every intention to run 3 times this week, and Amy will be asking me if I've done it.
Lovely, thank you. We've got a couple of questions that are quite related here. So the first one is from Asprida and then also from Rod. And this was around how during the pandemic, everyone has become an IPC expert, and they feel that they can then challenge those who are the IPC leads. Rod said, how do you deal with frustrations when delivering information and guidance to people who think they know better? So similar questions, I think probably related to the current context, but possibly very transferable.
Very transferable. I might go first with this one, if that's all right, Nicola. It just makes me think of, so when you're an HR director, everyone thinks they know about HR. So because finance director is very specific, your nursing director is very specific, your medical director is very specific, and whoever else, HR people, everyone thinks they have a view about HR. So the reason that I'm saying that is because I really get it and I really understand it. And I think that if you can, again, think about it from building understanding continually together, I wonder if that helps. So I think of course, you'll have expertise, but the word expert, I sometimes think can be a bit tricky because it stops us learning and thinking and growing together. And we've had to do that in this time, haven't we? Because the guidance has changed, as I understand it, so often. I listen to Dr. Sarah Jarvis very often, and she's a really good example of someone who clearly wants to be an expert in everything as an incredible GP. And she's had to, I've really seen her change over this last year to say, do you know what? You know what I said last week? That's gone now because the guidance has changed and we need to do this. So I think if you can embrace it, as hard as it is, and know when you have something that you think is really important. So of course, there's something about asserting, but I do think you need to balance the cooperation and the assertiveness around what you know. That's my off-the-cuff thoughts. Nicola?
I really haven't got anything else to add other than try and avoid combat. Notice where you're going and think about how can I, in my head, be not saying I'm right, you're wrong, and try and find a way of saying, could we both be right here? It's so easy for us to sit here and say, but all these situations set up a series of behaviour, and the only behaviour we can change is our own, and that often starts with our mindset. So notice your mindset. Where have I gone? Am I digging my heels in? How can I keep this open as a dialogue rather than a standoff? It's a whole coaching conversation.
It is, absolutely. And a few comments from how the kind of hierarchy within, so ingrained within the healthcare and social care system that gives certain people's voice more prominence over others. And some people, it sounds from the chat and the questions, feel that the IPC nurses haven't necessarily got that permission to take their authority that they should. A bit of a different question that I'm going to go to from Courtney, because she comes from a care home setting. So she's a new deputy manager in a care home setting, finds herself quite anxious about being an agent of change in that setting as a newcomer to the UK as well, and working within the care homes is there a way that she can approach this to inspire rather than be perceived as a threat?
Wow, well done for doing all those things. I'm already in awe. There's no single quick answer. I think the very fact you're aware of that, self-awareness is the starting point. So do I understand? I understand what needs to be done. Do I understand how what I want to do might impact? Is a huge leap forward. We noticed at the start of this, we heard a vision. We saw Amy's model about our job as leaders is to set a direction and then engage people with it and inspire them to be committed. I do think the first thing is to set out what it is you want to achieve in a compelling way, and storytelling and personal links to what matters in terms of values and beliefs is really the best place to start. If you want people to change, you've got to really tell them a compelling story. You've got to resonate with the things that matter to the people that you want to change. And then you ask them, how are we going to do this together? So changing together and working on it together rather than being done to has always been my aim in terms of leading change and leading, making things better and different. Let's do this together. Let's not do it to people. Amy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
What's the lady's name?
Oh, I've sent it away. Sorry. Courtney, it was Courtney, wasn't it?
Courtney, I was just going to say the same as Nicola. Wow, what a lovely job. It's just making me think about my early leadership roles. So you've got a contained environment, you've got a team, how lovely. You know, you haven't got this huge organization. So I would say enjoy it, try and enjoy it, try and be yourself, try and keep learning. I do think finding support mechanisms. So I think at that level, it's about who around you. Are there other managers or deputy managers that could support you and you could talk together? Gemma, I think there's going to be action learning as part of this, isn't there? So that's a really great vehicle to share stories, and you know, we learn so much from other people, and then we have our own practice. So yeah, just enjoy it.
Fantastic, thanks Amy. So we've run out of time now for questions, but just having a look over, a lot of the questions are relating to the theme of our next webinar, which is around managing upwards. And so I think we'll address lots of that there. But I will ask if Amy and Nicola could have a glance over those questions in the break and type their answers to any others. There's just one request from Sally. Amy, could you repeat the quote about cynical people? That really hit a chord with her.
I can. Well, now I have to remember exactly as I said it. So, a cynical person is a passionate person who just doesn't want to be disappointed again.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you. So we are going to take a break now, and what we would really urge you to do is not to jump on your emails and see what you've missed whilst you've been on this webinar. So take some time away from the screen, and we're going to have 15 minutes. We'll start back again at 11:35, where we'll move on to the psychological safe spaces. And as I say, we would urge you to take some break, make yourself a coffee, and come back to us refreshed for the second part of the session. So see you in 15. Thanks everyone. Thanks Nicola, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, well, welcome back everyone. I hope that you've had a chance to grab a coffee and maybe a bit of fresh air, and hopefully there's some sunshine where you are as well. We're going to move the session onto this topic of promoting psychologically safe spaces in organisations and teams. And this is a particularly relevant area and topic currently. Psychological safety has become part of mainstream language now in response to the pandemic, and particularly thinking about how the well-being of staff, particularly nurses, is attended to in order for them to be able to continue to respond in the current situation, and also thinking about moving forwards and beyond. So this is a term that I want to break down a little bit for you, think about what it actually means in practice, and then also introduce you to a method of how you might create psychologically safe spaces, both for yourself in terms of this network, but also how you might take these practices back to your own teams. So let's move this one along. So first of all, the role of psychological safety is all around offering opportunity for staff to gain psychological containment. And this is a term that's been around for many years within the psychotherapy world. And quite a lot was written about how psychological containment was relevant, particularly after incidences like the 9/11. So if you are interested in reading more about this concept, I've put a link there to a reference where this model has been applied to that particular response. So those that responded to the 9/11 disaster were then offered certain interventions that were all situated around psychological containment. So if we make it into those simple terms that you and I can grasp and think what this actually means to us in the real world, is it's about relationships. And it's a relationship where a person who is experiencing an emotion that is difficult for them to understand, to respond to be able to move forward from, and they offer it to another person or a group or a particular environment, and it enables them to reflect, to reconsider, to reframe that emotion so that it's given back to them in a way that they can respond more effectively to. So when it comes down to its absolute core, it's based on being able to show empathy to another, to not feel overwhelmed by the response of that person, and being able to validate their experiences by communicating to them your understanding of what's happening and helping them to reflect upon that. Now, you will have conversations constantly, I'm sure, with colleagues, with your own networks that offers this opportunity. And we don't want to overcomplicate it any more than that. So this is something that we offer regularly to our friends, our family, and our colleagues. And sometimes it's about recognizing what it is that you're doing and the function of that. So let's break it down. It's a process between people. It is about relationships. The relationship acts as the container for that particular emotion. So something's happened to that person, somebody feels a certain way, the container or the relationship holds that emotion and doesn't react. We allow the person to project their feelings, sometimes very challenging feelings, sometimes ones that they don't particularly have words or an understanding of. They project that into that relationship, and the relationship or the container helps that emotion to be processed. It creates an understanding for that person. The relationship offers feedback, notices maybe aspects of that person's behaviour or response that they're not able to notice in themselves. And together they make sense of it. So once they've been processed in that way, we're then in a position to together think about a way that we might respond to that moving forward. So I'd like you just to take a moment now to think about how this plays out in your own organisation, and you can use the chat function to do this. So currently, with this increased emphasis on psychological well-being of staff, how is your organisation providing containment? How is it providing opportunities for relationships to be created, which enable these very difficult emotions and feelings to be processed in this way? Do you think we're doing it effectively? And if not, why not? And how do you think it can be improved? So I'll just pause for a few moments now for you to pop your thoughts down into the chat box. It'd be interested to hear people's examples from what is happening in our current situation, particularly as the emphasis around these issues is much more acknowledged. So some examples that are coming through in the chat box is that we have examples of places like health and wellbeing hubs and spaces where staff can come and have some thinking time. Often they're staffed by volunteers who are trained in what we often call mental health first aid. And this just gives people the opportunity to air and voice their issues and challenges, helps them think through their thoughts and feelings. We've got some other examples over matron open forums. Kathy shared an example there, and similarly the wellbeing rooms. So the idea of a physical space has been something that has been quite prominent across the whole of the response to the pandemic. So people have called them wobble rooms, well-being spaces, hubs, those kinds of things, and purely about offering people some thinking time and making sure when those emotions become more challenging, there is somebody to have those types of conversations with. So just to reiterate, this is not about a psychological intervention. The vast majority of people, 99% of people, will not require intervention from a mental health trained expert like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, mental health nurse. That's not what's required. That actually what is required on the whole is supportive conversations with peers, which enables people to make sense and feel that level of empathy and validation that we mentioned in that first slide. So loads of really great examples of how that's been attended to currently. And one of our challenges is to ensure that once we pass the peak of the pandemic, that we continue to maintain this level of awareness around those psychological needs. Okay, so thank you for sharing those thoughts and your own experiences. What we might start to be seeing in these current times is a more significant forms of emotional distress in our colleagues. And sometimes it's helpful to think about, as Amy and Nicola identified before, what's the underpinning reason for that? So not necessarily, again, thinking about some of those underlying psychological issues, but some of the more day-to-day stresses that we're experiencing. And this analogy of the stress bucket is sometimes helpful to think about in this way. So those of you that have done the mental health first aid training will be familiar with this analogy. But again, nice way to put this into day-to-day terminology. We think about ourselves as a bucket. No offense, everybody's a bucket. So and what that means is that we all have a capacity to deal with stress. But the levels that our bucket is filled up with on a standard day is different for every single one of us. And that's all based on our own perceptions of how we respond to stress and our own appraisal of those stress responses. How well can I cope with the situation ahead of me? And that's implied by some of our early experiences, some of the coping strategies that we've learned as we've grown up. But on a day-to-day basis, we all experience stresses and they fill our bucket up, and slowly our bucket can start to rise. But we have ways of making our bucket a leaky bucket. So ways that we cope with things on a day-to-day basis that balance those stresses out. So for example, stresses might be things like a poor diet, it may be a financial concern, maybe a relationship issue, and they're filling the bucket up. But we have things that we've used, tried and tested ways that we use to cope with those things, and they help to keep us at a balance. Things like meeting up with friends, talking things through, accessing things like exercise, being in the outdoors, the sunshine, those kinds of things are the types of things that often help people to find that balance. Now, what we're seeing at the current time is that a lot of those stresses have been different. Many of us have not dealt with the kinds of situations and stresses that we're experiencing now. You know, the level of tension that you described in your Q&A with Amy and Nicola shows that those working relationships can be particularly fraught right now. We're dealing with highly changeable situations on a day-to-day basis and not having that security of an evidence base, a tried and tested way to know how to respond to this situation. So there are increased stresses right now, and that's just in the workplace. You know, the situation as it presents has also added stresses into our personal lives as well, relationships at home, children homeschooling, again financial issues. So there are additional stresses currently. And then we couple that with the fact that lots of the things that we would normally do to help us manage our stress have not been possible. And that's because of the social distancing restrictions, so holidays, seeing family, seeing friends, going out for a meal, those kinds of things have not been available to us. So what we start to see is an imbalance. The stresses are increasing and our usual coping strategies either aren't available to us or they're not functioning in the same way to balance. And so the level in our bucket starts to rise. And when we see that level start to rise, that's when we might start to see some early signs of emotional distress in that person. So people might be describing to you that they feel overwhelmed, maybe their thoughts are racing, they notice they're more irritable than usual. They might describe, as Nicola and Amy identified, feeling more constantly anxious and worried. So whereas some level of anxiety in relation to a particular event is very normal, we might see that level of anxiety is more continuous. People may start to lack their self-confidence, and it may affect things like their diet and their sleep. You might start to see some avoidant behaviour. So rather than confronting problems, people don't feel that they've got the strength to do that, so they avoid those issues. And also things that might happen more or less than normal, like eating more, drinking out more alcohol or smoking more. Now, all of these things are elements that container, that relationship, can respond really effectively to. And the evidence coming out from the Royal Psychological Society is saying exactly that relationships with peers, with our natural social networks, are the most effective for managing this level of emotional distress. Now, in the workplace, we offer that through our wobble rooms, through the various different types of strategies that you've described. But what we might start to notice is that this level of emotional distress for some individuals is starting to affect their quality of life, their ability to live a life that is meaningful to them. And it may also be starting to affect their ability to do their job. And in this stage, again, this is not about us adopting those psychological interventions. This is about us helping people to notice that in themselves and seek out the support that is available. And we've popped the link there that describes all of the different support structures that have been made available as a result of the pandemic in order to respond to those that do require additional support. But really to emphasize, this will be a small number. The majority of people will find what they need in the kinds of settings that you've described there, and also in the example that we're going to give you now. So co-consulting is a method that we want to share with you of providing psychological safety. And the reason why we're sharing this with you in such a lot of depth is because when you go to your action learning set, which you will have booked onto following this webinar, then this is the method that the facilitator will be using with you. And what we hope is that you will encounter this method and you will find it valuable, and then you will continue to work as a group. You'll continue to meet as a group to work in a co-consulting framework and continue this support moving forward. So the facilitator in this circumstance is just there to coach the participants through the process. They're not the coach themselves. You as the participants are both the clients and the coach. The emphasis is totally placed on those that are involved, developing their own solutions and ways forward. Now, we always say that we should start each session with clarifying a group agreement. And the reason why we do this is because we need that environment to feel safe. If people are going to treat that environment as that psychological containment, as that safe place, they need to know that there are certain conditions that we've all agreed upon around things like confidentiality, respect, those types of areas. So we often ask a question at the beginning of these sessions, something like, what kinds of conditions or behaviours will enable you to bring your whole authentic self to this session? Now, that I'm a mental health nurse, and that sentence makes me cringe. So you'll find a different way of framing that. But I often ask people to think about the scenario situations where they felt able to be present, to be honest, to be true to themselves. What was the nature of those types of groups that enabled them to do those things? And we could accept those stock answers that we often hear, but we want to dig a little bit deeper and just to check in that actually we mean these things and we understand what we mean by those things. So moving on now to the process. So the Co Consortium Method has a very structured process, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. It starts off with the group. There will be a maximum of 6 of you in the group with a facilitator, and you identify who has what role. And initially you will identify somebody as the client and 2 people as the coach. And then the other 3 people there are there to observe the process and contribute to the reflective discussion a little bit later on. So the client starts off with giving you their problem statement. And you'll notice from the handout you'll receive in the follow-up pack from today that we're very strict around timings. So we don't go into storytelling at this point. We don't need to know the detail about the people, the place, the time, those kinds of things. We're just around summarising what is the problem statement that you would appreciate some support and reflection around. The coach then goes on to ask you some clarification questions. Now, these questions are often closed questions. They're about checking out the facts. So have I understood this correctly? When you talk about Sarah, is she your line manager? Those kinds of things. And again, we time limit the amount of time that we base around those clarification questions. The purpose of that is to check that you've got an accurate understanding of the problem statement. We then move on to the other coach, offering some exploratory questions. And this is where we dedicate the most amount of time. These are the questions that are the open questions. They ask you to reflect on some of the things that maybe are underpinning the problem statement, some of the thoughts, feelings, behaviours that you've encountered as a result of this particular problem, and really help you to start to unpick that problem statement, to see a little bit more around those, what the difficult emotions are and what might be driving them, thinking about other people within the scenario, and again understanding their response a little bit differently. And then we ask the coach to do something that does feel quite strange. So we're doing this in a virtual environment, and we'll ask the client at that point to turn their camera off, and the whole group has a reflective discussion around what they've heard. And what happens in that moment is the client gets to listen intently to what other people think about their situation, which is a very rare opportunity. In fact, I don't know any other circumstances that you would have opportunity to do that. And the group have an opportunity to demonstrate that validation, that empathy, and also at that point share some of the experiences that they've had that maybe resonate with this scenario and how they've maybe managed them as well. We then invite the client back and we ask them to reflect on what they heard, and if it's appropriate, identify if there are any further actions that need to be taken as a result of it. Now, it is a very strange scenario, and I appreciate it won't feel very natural to people, and you may be feeling a little bit skeptical about the value of it. But actually, by doing this many times, what we hear constantly is that opportunity to hear other people's perspectives who share your world. They understand the culture, they understand a lot of those challenges, but hearing those perspectives and not having a pressure to respond, to give a justification, even to offer any non-verbal communications, is a really enlightening process. And it can be those light bulb moments where you think, oh, of course, I could have thought about it in that way, or it could be seen in that way. So there is a framework that underpins this approach, and it's all based on research and theory around group dynamics. And what we've done is sent you an article that's all about what's called the Bart approach. And I'd encourage you to read that article. It acknowledges itself that it kind of reduces this stuff down into very simple framework, but it's very helpful as we're engaging in the co-consulting to be thinking about how we're adhering to this framework, because that's what makes it feel different to just a general conversation that we maybe have with friends or colleagues. This is a process of learning and reflection. So the B stands for the boundary, and the boundary is very much about that container. How do we make this feel like a safe space to bring these very difficult and confusing emotions. And the way that we set the boundaries is around things like the timing. So we're very strict as facilitators around the amount of time that we put to each part of that process. And we do that because it's very transparent then. That's very much about fairness and equality across the group. People are very clear about what that expectation is of them within that time frame. And within any kinds of a psychological safety process, we would always want to say that this is limited. There's a territory around it. This is the territory of this scenario and situation, and we need to be very clear about that and agree to it. And then the whole group has to adhere to those boundaries that we've set. The authority side of it, the A, is around the way in which authority is offered within groups. And you will know from your own reflections and experiences of how groups work, there's sometimes a formal authority that's about job title. You know, the most senior person in this group takes on a particular level of authority. Sometimes it's delegated. So in this scenario, we do delegate roles. We delegate the role to the client, we delegate roles to the consultant, and we're very clear about those things and what the expectations are. But we also have some personal authority. So that's how we respond in groups as our natural personality and the authority that then lends to it. So some of us that are maybe more vocal, comfortable with sharing our thoughts out loud, maybe appreciate exploring our feelings and emotions in that sort of group setting, compared to others who maybe process those things in their internal world and only share them when they've made sense of them in a way that they feel comfortable with. And that will all affect those levels of authority within the group. So as the facilitator, we keep a really close eye on those things and make sure that that delegated authority that comes with those different roles is actually taken up by the individuals. So linked to this is often roles. Roles and authority go really closely together. So as I said before, the role is often the formal side, is the job description. The informal is our group dynamics, the personalities and those that we delegate within this. And then finally, the task. So we all need to understand what we're here to achieve. And we've recorded a video which gives you an example of one round of co-consulting. So you can actually see what will happen in the sessions and you know exactly what to expect. So there's real clarity around this task and a good, at the start of the session, there'll be a sense of, have we got a mutual understanding of what this is going to involve? Usually in your sessions, you've got 3 hours with a facilitator, and usually that'll give you an opportunity to do 3 or 4 rounds of co-consulting, so 3 or 4 people acting as the client and everybody have an opportunity to work as the coach. So your action learning set, the next part of this programme, this is an opportunity for you to practice this method and see not only how the facilitator works, but how you respond to the client and the coach roles. We hope you've already booked your session through Eventbrite. It's just one session as part of this programme. But as I said before, we would encourage you then to swap contact details and continue to meet as frequently as you guys agree, to continue this ongoing peer support as a national group of IPC leads. You should have automatically received an invitation to the session, which includes your Zoom link. And that's all you need to do to attend the session. If you click on the link, you will join the group of 6 with a facilitator, and they will take you through the whole of the process. But the bit of work to do before the session, so this is the preparation bit, and it's entirely up to you if you do this straight away or a bit closer to your session. Please do watch this film. It's about an hour long. So if you give yourself 90 minutes just to make some notes, stop and pause it, maybe think about what you're learning from observing that. And also to read the article on the Bart model, which is, again, we'll share with you as part of this, the follow-up materials for this session, just so you can get a sense of what is that boundary authority, the responsibilities, roles, and also the task. And just a final reminder before we move into our Q&A is that our next webinar, the second in the series, has the title Managing Upwards. And based on the Q&A session, I absolutely think this was the right way to focus. But we will have a debrief with all of the facilitators from the Action Learning Set before this session and make sure that we understand more of that IPC contextual stuff that you're dealing with, so that can feed into the content of this webinar. Now, if you haven't booked on already, please do. There are still some spaces. If you aren't able to book on, don't worry. Everybody that has attended today will be sent a recording of that second webinar on the 23rd of June as well. There we are. Thank you, Amy, Nicola, for some questions.
Thank you, Gemma. So before we look at questions, well done. That was, like you said with our presentation, I learned loads in that, and it really spoke to what we talked about in terms of anxiety and managing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think the way we're going to manage it is I'm going to say some of the questions, and Nicola, because some of them might have relevance to your section as well as our section. So Nicola will do the sort of response from our perspective. Can I start with one that was actually in chat?
Yeah, of course.
Because I noticed it when it came in and I thought, how interesting. So when you talked about containment, someone said actually when they go into a wobble room, it's a bit difficult because there are lots of questions. So I just thought that was an interesting reflection. I wondered if you had any comments about that in terms of how they might manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I wonder sometimes whether part of our default reaction is to want to problem solve in these situations. And often in order to do that, we want to get to the bottom of what the issue is. But one of the things that I think I learn as a mental health nurse and through my own practice is that the containment is actually about that safe listening space. And sometimes through questioning, you can feel like that person can feel like they're being interrogated, or they've got to justify their feelings. Maybe they don't have the answers yet either, so it just feels very uncomfortable. So my suggestion in that situation would be to very politely say to that person, I've come for a bit of time and space away. Thank you for offering your support, but I'll just take a moment to myself to reflect on what I've just come from, the situation I've just come from, and that's about our own boundaries and being able to be quite assertive, I think, about what we need from those environments.
Brilliant, thank you. Nicola, is there anything you want to add to that, or I'm putting you on the spot there with that question, really?
No, I thought it was a great question, and it resonated with me as and being the expert in the room and sometimes not wanting to be, and just owning that, and if that's a safe space, being able to say it.
Yeah.
I haven't got any questions for you at the moment, Gemma, but there was one earlier about motivation. So after our session, there was a question about how you keep yourself motivated as a leader in order to motivate others. And I wonder if maybe if I look to Nicola, whether there's any thoughts that you've got on that question, Nicola.
I saw that there as well, and I saw another part to it, when I don't feel valued.
Yes. Right,
so how do I motivate myself and others when I myself don't feel valued? And that's a really tough call, and I don't think we can sit here and give you the answer. Again, I think the starting point is noticing the impact of not feeling valued. I'm thinking of all the times that's happened to me and where that takes me and how important it is, and knowing what you need and where you can get some of that validation in order to not transfer it. Because as leaders, our job is absolutely not to transfer how we feel to the people we lead. So we have to first of all notice how we feel, do something with that in order to be the motivator of others. So it's a tough call. Noticing it is the first thing, and then putting something in place that detaches how you're feeling with how you appear to the people you lead. It's exhausting. So it's also thinking, where do I go to recover when I've had to be in that place? I'm not sure that's a full answer, but these are tricky things, and I'm getting a sense of some of the frustration that people are managing.
I was thinking as well, Nicola, I think it was you or Amy that said about being able to think about, you know, where you're getting stuck, where are the barriers that you're just not getting anywhere with, and investing your energy in the places where you can recharge that motivation and you can get that sense of achievement back. And also thinking or reconnecting with your own internal motivations. So sometimes, particularly in situations like this, we become very task orientated, and it's just about kind of doing what's needed to get through or dealing with the next crisis. And we can really forget what it is that drives us, what made us apply for that particular role, or what it was that we gained that enjoyment out of initially. So perhaps using the action learning sets or another type of psychologically space to reconnect with what were those initial drivers, what are the internal motivations that this context can't affect, they're yours, they belong to you, and reconnecting with those and reminding yourself of those.
Brilliant, thank you both. There's a question here from Kathy. How do you approach someone's well-being when you can see concerns but they've not acknowledged that? Gemma.
So in that circumstance, Kathy, it's really tricky, because what we often again want to do is to problem solve. We want to be able to intervene on behalf of that individual, and sometimes we can find ourselves wanting to rescue that person from the scenario that they're in. So in the majority of cases, they may not recognise it themselves, but the situation's not causing them any particular harm at that time, or they're not posing any harm to another. And so it's just about offering that continuous safety, that safe space for them to continue to come back to and explore some of those feelings. Now, if it does to get to a situation where you do become concerned about their well-being, or you do think that their well-being is affecting their ability to practice safely, that's when you would have a duty of care to start to escalate those areas, and that might be about your direct line manager notifying them, or making sure that that person was aware of what those the next steps would be that were available to them. So quite a upfront and frank conversation at that point. But often you find if you go there too quickly and the person isn't ready to hear it, all that happens is that containing relationship breaks down. They stop coming to you for support, and therefore they're dealing with those challenges on their own.
Thank you, Gemma. Nicola, I think we've got the perfect one for you as you bask in the sunlight of where you are. John's asking a great question, which is providing advice about how to motivate a team that doesn't feel valued by an organisation.
Thanks for that one, Amy. Like there's an instant. I think it's linked. So the team doesn't feel valued. I don't feel valued. How do I motivate the team? We have to be really careful as leaders not to take on the persona of the organisation. So noticing a team doesn't feel valued, we've then got to think about what can I do? It's spheres of influence. I can't change what the organisation is doing. I can change how I am. And Amy, you talked about the way we behave linked to our mindset can help motivate our team, and understanding what motivates that team. We all have different relationships with motivation. So spending some time understanding what's impacting a team and how they're feeling, and then thinking about what's in my sphere of influence to do something about it. It's the same task, which is really tough, of not just absorbing and being that organisation. It is possible to be different from the environment that you're working in, and then thinking about how can I best serve this team in this moment. I don't know if that answers entirely, but I think the trick to this is noticing and detaching from and not colluding with the environment that you're operating in.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a couple of practical questions which I'm going to leave for the Academy Office to answer about booking on client sessions, etc.
I've just spotted one in the chat about spiritual support and about the place of that in containment. I would say it's absolutely central. The reason why this particular model fits, I think, so well is that it's adaptable to the individuals in the room. They bring whatever elements that contribute to their well-being, they bring with them. It's all about the person having the space to identify what resources are effective in moving forward from their particular challenge. And for some individuals, that spiritual element is absolutely core and key to that. And the great thing about it not being sort of an imposed model where an expert says, well, these are the things I'm going to teach you in order to cope with this situation, is that all of that learning is brought up in the sessions and it's shared. So people take such a lot from learning from each other's strategies and approaches as well. So where spiritual is relevant to you and contributes to your well-being in various different degrees, then that should come into the role of containment.
Thank you. Nicola, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I didn't know whether I'm going to pass it back to you, whether you wanted to talk about renewal and what that means for people, because looking after ourselves and being in a good place helps with our containment. Means different things for different, we do it in different ways. But Ahmed, if you wanted to just mention the work we do around those 4 areas of renewal.
Yes, thank you. So we often work with, we run programs on effectiveness, and we either run programs for sort of whoever wants to come or for teams, particularly if we think that they need a bit of help with their sort of personal ways of working. And one of the habits is about that personal renewal. So, you know, the Mother Teresa, the lamp doesn't burn unless you put oil in it. I should have thought of a Florence Nightingale quote then, but it didn't come to mind. It's a nurse though. And they talk about 4 parts of renewal. So they talk about mental renewal, physical renewal, social emotional renewal, and spiritual renewal. And if you think about those 4 boxes, what some people do is think, actually, I have activities that fit every box. So I don't know whether it's going out for a run with a friend fits physical and social and mental. Or sometimes they think, do you know what, some of those boxes aren't quite as full as others. So it just, if you like a 4-box framework, and if you like a way of compartmentalizing your renewal, that's quite a nice way to look at it. The spiritual bit, just a sort of a health warning, sometimes people think, well, what does that really mean to me? And we say it's the way to think about it is something that lifts your soul, whatever that is. Something just makes you feel good. It could be something as simple as a bath with a candle. My teenage boys would kill me if they knew I said this.
You're being recorded.
I know. Something discovered in lockdown, but it was fascinating, was the bath with a candle. So that's all I'm saying. Yeah, so it could be anything that lifts your soul. We've got something, let me just read this through a minute.
Shall I take a question that's popped up in the chat while you look at those, Amy?
Yeah, lovely.
So there's a comment about the Wellbeing Action Plan, which is a tool that's been increasingly used, has previously been utilised around people with mental health issues and looking at how they move into that recovery phase, but it's increasingly being used now and utilised for staff thinking about recovery from what has been for some people a particularly traumatic experience. And the whole premise of it is based on that stress bucket. And the Wellbeing Action Plan is, how do we notice when our bucket's starting to get to the overflow? So what are the early warning signs for us that emotional distress is starting to become problematic? So is it things like sleeplessness? Do we notice different patterns in the way that we're eating, weight loss, weight gain, those kinds of things? They're all unique to us. And what the action plan does is help us to notice those things. And the idea is that if we notice them, we're self-aware, we can increase those leaky bucket bits. We can start to think about, how do we get that renewal? How do we rebalance again so that the bucket doesn't overflow? And that's about, I think somebody put in the chat box, it's about feeling in control. our mental well-being is not something that is something that others dictate to us. It's something that we can, without the right awareness, can feel in control of. And the sense of control is often more than half the challenge.
Thank you, Gemma. We have had a comment. I think we've touched on it, but I think this is a very honest question about somebody who has, to the detriment of themselves, tried to protect their staff by allowing their staff to go on leave, and clearly has been managing their staff's workload, which has led to them running on empty for the last few months. So the question is, how do they regain their balance and not feel guilt not working or being available to support their team? I don't know which one of you wants to give some thoughts on that.
Shall I start? Give Gemma time to think. So I read that and it really struck a chord, because clearly your intent is to do the right thing by your staff. Sometimes what we do and what we say don't connect. And there's something about role modeling. And I'm interested in the notion of guilt for not being available, because I really think as leaders in these sorts of conditions, we have to do the things we're asking staff to do. And I'm thinking of a completely different story of a very senior police officer starting work in a new organisation, and previous to that had always made an effort to leave early twice a week to go and do the school run, and felt that when he took on the most senior role in this police force, he wouldn't be able to do that anymore. And I pushed back and challenged him and said, why on earth can't you? Well, I'm going to be very important and I won't have time. And how will that look to your staff? Well, I'll tell them it's okay for them to do it. And I said, and if you don't do it, how easy will it be for them to leave at 4 and go and pick up the children? And he thought about it. He thought, no, you're right. And he said, I won't be able to do it every day, but I'm going to make one day a week the day that I leave at 4, even if I don't have to pick the children up. And he's doing that to this day. Now, it didn't mean he had to go and do work in the evening to catch up. He made sure he didn't send emails late at night, because what you say and what you do need to be the same. And actually, you will be available to support your staff if you're well and fit and take some time off to recover. So for me, it's a little bit about putting myself first in order to be available for people is really important. You may have a different view, Gemma or Amy.
Very similar, Nicola. I would say identical advice to that. The only other thing I would add is Amy's point about some of those emotions and feelings being the drivers for our behaviour. So the feeling of guilt is what's driving that particular response. And actually, it might be a response that's perpetuating the problem. We can end up in cycles, can't we, where we think we're doing the thing that will alleviate the problem, but actually it's not addressing it. So maybe just noticing the fact that that person has noticed that it's the guilt feeling that's the issue, and having those compassionate conversations with yourself, with other people in similar scenarios to you. So you get permission. I think it's important, isn't it, to get permission to say, actually, this is not about me letting people down or putting others before myself. It's about how I role model. So reframing that underpinning feeling.
Lovely. The only thing that I would add is I can't remember a decision that was a wise decision when it was fueled by guilt. That would be my sort of final point about that. So I think that's a really healthy perspective, Gemma, which is about what emotion is driving the behaviour and what's stopping you doing the things that theoretically are the right things to do, which is to look after yourself in order to look after others.
And I noticed Penny mentioned in the chat around this being really difficult to do this year, and I can really understand and empathise, having been working in a charity environment where it's felt very much about survival. That's the way that we've had to think about and crisis management, really transforming the way that we work. So I can see that it is very difficult in this context. And if we were dealing with a crisis situation, I would say, okay, fair enough, we can put those things to one side because this is crisis and we can manage this. But we're now a year later, and we're not in crisis mode anymore. We've ended up in endurance mode. How long can we sustain this to be able to continue to work in this way? So those strategies are not effective in that scenario. There are fight flight strategies. That's the zebra instinct coming in us, and we need to think about, actually, that's effective in the short term, but this is not the short term. This is the long term, and this is now moving into another phase.
Thank you, Gemma. And I think the Academy Office are answering the logistical questions. I do think a link's just gone out. So anyone thinking about how do I book on to the co-consulting or future sessions, I think a link has just gone out to you. Just because we've got a couple of minutes and there isn't a live question coming in, there was a question earlier, which again, I don't think we've totally looked at, which was about professional lines. So it's about you're sort of staying friendly with colleagues and still having professional lines. So how do you support staff to separate from being friendly with their colleagues and stay within professional lines? And I just wondered whether we sort of have a view about that. Nicola, I'd probably look to you first around that one.
Yeah, I saw that. So it was quite early on, somebody talked about how do I support a staff member to be separate from being friendly with their colleagues, having been promoted, and to stay within professional lines. And it struck a chord. And I remembered when I got this badly wrong in my first management post. I wanted to be everyone's mate. I'd never managed people before. Started meeting people socially, and then I had to have one of those awful performance conversations, and it was so hard. So it's a learning process. It's a way of talking to somebody about what you notice. It's about giving people feedback in a compassionate way, and it's helping them think about the consequences. It is absolutely fine to get on with your team. It's probably not the best idea to be their best mates, and it's a fine line. And I think it's a bit of experience. It's a bit of understanding why boundaries matter. And sometimes using the example of a difficult conversation can help land the message that you're trying to give, but done in an understanding and compassionate way that accepts this is a tricky line, because we like to be liked and we like to like our colleagues. What I often say to people is, as leaders, we can't expect to be liked by everybody. I'm afraid it goes with the job. We can aim to be respected. And if we aim to be respected, it can help build those boundaries.
I completely agree. I was thinking the same around the boundaries aspect of it that we touched on before, and maybe that article, the Bart article, might help that individual. So as a mental health nurse, boundaries are so incredibly central to our therapeutic work, and sometimes we have to manage some really challenging behaviour within those limitations of the boundaries. And there was an article I read a good few years ago that talked about a concept called the pseudo-ordinary me. So the sort of pretend, very human you, this kind of presentation that you give to connect with people, to make those relationships that feel very supportive, but that this is a professional relationship, and every interaction has an intention that's underpinned by your role as that person's nurse or leader or whatever the dynamics are. But yeah, if that's helpful to anyone, the pseudo-ordinary me is stayed with me.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you both of you for answering those questions. I think we've literally ticked them all off, which is absolutely incredible. So I think I'm handing back. Am I handing back to Greta to close this this webinar? Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. First of all, thank you to Amy and Nicola for all of the content that you've offered today, and also thank you to our audience who have felt so engaged with us. We've had some really fantastic questions, very thought-provoking, and it feels like this material has really chimed with what was needed. Now, you will have seen we've got a special guest that's dropped in to say hello to you. So I'm going to hand over to Greta to do the introductions.
Thank you, Gemma. Thanks, Nicola and Amy. Fabulous, really fabulous. Thank you so much. Now, I had a message earlier on this morning that Ruth wanted to say hi to 172 people who are on this call. So Ruth, a very, very good welcome this morning. Is it still the morning? Oh, just this afternoon. Thank you so much for your interest in this group of amazing nurses, and what a year they've had as IPC nurses during COVID. I don't expect I really need to introduce Ruth, do I? Let's go for it. So you should all know Ruth. If not, if you haven't met her, you're missing a trick there. So Ruth has been the CNO for England since 2019. She comes from an executive nursing role in NHS Improvement, and then Monitor before that. Done great things with the prevention of pressure ulcers across England, and Ruth is just the most incredible leader. She's got a fantastic team with her now, and Ruth has been during COVID-19 the national lead, nursing and midwifery lead for the COVID-19 response. We've seen lots of Ruth this year. We've seen her all over the place. We've seen her on Twitter. We've seen her at Downing Street. Moving on, we have seen we've seen her everywhere, and we really, really thank you for your leadership. It's been an incredible year to be a nurse or a midwife, and you at the helm has just really helped steer the professions in the right direction. And as the sun shines, and we're coming towards the end of this hideous restrictions, and all because actually the IPC nurses across the country have done their job in helping curb the infection rate even further. So without further ado, I just want to say hi to Ruth and thank you for joining this group.
Greta, thank you, and hello everybody. My name is Ruth, and it's good to join you on the launch of this leadership. I don't know what you're calling it, event. What was it, sorry?
A leadership boost.
Boost. Well, I like that, leadership boost. It feels like a vitamin boost, a sunshine boost that I clearly need at the moment. God, what a year it's been, over years. It's 13, 14 months now, 13 months, certainly. We have had a global health emergency. We've had a pandemic. It's something that when people have planned for it, they hope it would never happen. And here we are being leaders in our profession during this pandemic. And gosh, IPC was important before, but this has made IPC even more important. And I've been thrilled to say that you all have not just worked enormously hard, but you have used your experience, your expertise, your knowledge to the fullest this year. And it's been hugely challenging. It's been hugely challenging for all nurses, midwives, care workers across the whole of the globe. But I think there are two sets of nurses that have had it the most challenging: critical care nurses and IPC nurses. And I'm delighted to have supported the Florence Nightingale Foundation, and of course Sue Tranker, Deputy CNO, and Lisa Ritchie, our head of IPC nursing, to develop what we are doing here today in this leadership boost, because actually it is your leadership day in, day out that has kept patients safe and our staff safe. And I know it's been tough. It's, don't know about you, but it's been the toughest time of my whole career, both professionally and personally. I don't know any family in my close circuit of friends that hasn't had somebody that's either been, they've either lost, or whether they've been severely affected by this dreadful, shitty virus of COVID-19. And it's been tough, hasn't it? It's been extraordinarily tough. But equally, alongside that big toughness, it's felt, I've never been so proud to be a nurse either. I've never felt so proud to say that I work for the NHS. And as much as the clapping for carers now is seen as something that we don't want, actually, do you know what? Those days when I was coming back from London, either doing a Nightingale shift or doing a number 10 experience or whatever it was, seeing those rainbows in the doors and the windows actually did give me some, it was really quite moving to see some of that, seeing that appreciation by the population of what the NHS have done, but also what, more importantly, nurses have contributed to that. So I wanted to say a very big personal thank you from me to you. Thank you. And also enjoy this leadership boost. I was very, very fortunate enough to be a Florence Nightingale scholar, gosh, some years ago now. And the problem is with doing the Florence Nightingale, Florence's scholarship, is that you will go on and do different jobs. I'm sure the Florence Nightingale Foundation scholarship helped me to get this role. And I'm delighted, although knackered, I'm delighted to have been able to lead the profession through this pandemic. But I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for what you've been doing. And thank you too for what you will continue to be doing, because we ain't out of this yet. I reckon we're in for another tough autumn and winter. And you would have heard Chris Whitty today talking to the MPs about what the next wave potentially could be. So we're going to need you. And I thank you for taking part in this. Thank you for listening to me. And thank you so much for allowing me to quickly pop in to say hello.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Brilliant. Thank you. Wonderful, marvellous appearance. Just needed. I've seen lots and lots of quotes popping up in the chat that saying they really appreciate your appearance, your encouragement, your enthusiasm, the motivation that you've given them, and the pure joy, love for IPC nurses at this time.
Yeah,
so
and we do
Ruth.
need to do more. We do need to do more. And looking at Sarah's comment, you know, one of the things that I'm working with Dido, and I will now be working with Jenny Harris, is about what nursing leadership we have in the new PHE, and what IPC leadership we have in there. So I'm already working with Dido on that, and I'll now start to work in other areas. But again, thank you for all of it you're doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you to everybody. Gemma, do you want to say anything?
No, that brings our first webinar to a close. So thank you so much, Ruth, for joining us, and Greta for helping us to close what's been a really, the idea of today, Ruth, was to step off the treadmill and just have some time to stop and think about the impact of this experience and how we learn and move forward from it. And the messages that are coming up on the chat is telling us that this was exactly what was needed. So thank you, and thanks for everybody that's contributed in the audience and as presenters today. And we shall see you at the next webinar, or you may see one of us facilitating some of the action learning sets as well. So all the best, everyone. Thank you.
Bye bye.